The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy downtown shopping district as Marcus Williams adjusted his security uniform and checked his radio one final time. At 42 years old, he had been working as a mall security guard for nearly 8 years, watching over the endless stream of families, teenagers and shoppers who filled the corridors each day. His weathered hands bore the calluses of a man who had worked construction for 15 years before a back injury forced him into this quieter profession. The weekend crowd was already building by 10 in the morning. Parents pushed strollers while juggling shopping bags. Elderly couples walked arm in arm past storefront windows. Groups of teenagers clustered around the food court. Marcus nodded politely to the familiar faces he recognized. Mrs. Chen, who owned the flower shop, the young mother with twin boys who visited the toy store every Saturday, and the maintenance crew starting their daily rounds behind the polished facade of retail normalcy. Marcus had learned to read the subtle signs that most people missed. The way someone's eyes darted nervously around a store, a tension in shoulders when someone felt watched, the forced casualness of someone trying too hard to blend in. 8 years of observing human behavior had taught him that trouble rarely announced itself with fanfare. Instead, it crept in quietly, wearing ordinary clothes and familiar faces. Near the east entrance, a small crowd had gathered around a street performer juggling colorful scarves. Children pressed their faces against the glass doors, watching in wonder as the performer tossed the fabric high into the air. Their laughter echoed through the corridor, mixing with the ambient sounds of conversation, footsteps, and the distant hum of the ventilation system. Marcus paused his patrol route to observe the scene. Not because he suspected any trouble, but because he had learned that moments of joy were worth protecting. In his years of service, he had seen how quickly happiness could shatter when darkness invaded safe spaces. A child's smile, a family's peaceful shopping trip, a couple's quiet conversation over coffee. These were the things that made his job meaningful. The radio crackled softly on his belt, dispatching units to handle minor issues throughout the complex. A spilled drink near the electronics store, a lost child who needed help finding her parents, a fender bender in the parking garage. Routine problems with routine solutions. Marcus had handled hundreds of similar situations, each one a small thread in the larger tapestry of keeping people safe and comfortable. As he resumed walking toward the central court area, Marcus noticed a man in his 30s standing near the children's play area. Something about the stranger's posture caught his attention, the way he stood too still while everyone around him moved naturally. The manner in which his gaze fixed intently on specific targets rather than taking in the general scene. The man wore dark jeans and a gray hoodie. It's unremarkable clothing that helped him blend into the crowd. The security guard's instincts, honed by years of experience and training, began to whisper warnings. Nothing concrete, nothing he could point to and say definitively was wrong, but an accumulation of small details that didn't quite fit the normal pattern of behavior he observed daily. Marcus had learned to trust these intuitions, even when logic couldn't immediately explain them. Children ran laughing between their parents and the colorful playground equipment, while the hooded stranger continued his motionless observation. Marcus positioned himself with a clear line of sight to the area, maintaining his casual patrol demeanor while keeping the man within his peripheral vision. Experience had taught him that obvious surveillance often made dangerous situations worse, while subtle awareness allowed him to respond appropriately when action became necessary. The morning continued with its normal rhythm of commerce and social interaction. But beneath the surface, an experienced guardian sensed the first tremors of something that would soon disrupt the peaceful, ordinary world he had sworn to protect. 20 minutes passed as Marcus maintained his careful observation while continuing his regular patrol duties. The hooded man had moved closer to the play area, standing beside a decorative planter where parents often sat to watch their children. His behavior remained unsettling, too focused, too purposeful for someone simply enjoying the scene of playing children. A family approached the playground equipment. The father carried shopping bags from several stores, while the mother guided their daughter, who appeared to be about 7 years old, toward the colorful slides and climbing structures. The little girl wore a bright pink dress with white sneakers, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that bounced as she skipped excitedly. Toward the play area, the child's enthusiasm was infectious. She waved to other children already playing, climbed enthusiastically onto the smaller structures designed for her age group, and called out to her parents to watch her navigate the various obstacles. Her mother and father found seats on nearby benches, setting down their packages and settling in to supervise their daughters. Playtime. Marcus noticed the hooded stranger's attention sharpened considerably when the family arrived. The man's previously casual stance became more alert, and his gaze fixed specifically on the little girl in the pink dress. Every few minutes, he would glance around the area as if checking for observers. But his primary focus always returned to the child. The security guard felt the familiar tightening in his chest. That came when his professional instincts detected genuine threat rather than mere suspicion. Years of training had taught him to distinguish between ordinary eccentric behavior and patterns that suggested harmful intent. This situation was crossing definitively into the latter category, moving with deliberate casualness. Marcus positioned himself closer to the family while maintaining the appearance of routine patrol. He pretended to check the emergency exit signs and straighten some promotional displays. Standard activities that wouldn't attract attention, but gave him better angles to observe the developing situation. The hooded man began moving in a slow circle around the play area, always keeping the little girl within sight. When she moved to different equipment, he adjusted his position accordingly. When her parents briefly looked away to check their phones or organize their shopping bags, his observation became more intense. The pattern was unmistakable to someone trained to recognize predatory behavior. Other families continued their normal activities, unaware of the silent drama unfolding around them. Toddlers stumbled happily between play structures. Older children organized impromptu games of tag, and parents chatted with each other about school schedules and weekend plans. The atmosphere remained cheerful and relaxed for everyone, except the two men who were now locked in an unspoken contest of awareness and surveillance. Marcus activated his radio discreetly. Speaking in the coded language security personnel used to communicate potential problems without alarming nearby civilians. He requested backup to his location but emphasized the need for plainclothes officers who wouldn't create obvious disturbance. The situation hadn't escalated to the point where a uniformed police presence was appropriate, but having additional trained personnel nearby would provide crucial support if circumstances deteriorated rapidly. The hooded stranger seemed to reach some internal decision point. He stopped his circling pattern and moved directly toward the bench where the little girl's parents were sitting. As he approached them, his hand moved to his jacket pocket, fingers closing around something concealed there. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable to Marcus, who had seen similar movements hundreds of times in training scenarios and real-world situations. The man's body language shifted from observation to action mode. His shoulders squared, his pace became more purposeful, and his expression hardened into something that made Marcus's blood run cold. Whatever the stranger had planned from the beginning was about to happen, and the security guard realized he was running out of time to prevent a situation that could traumatize or harm an innocent child in her family. Marcus began moving toward the family, abandoning any pretense of casual patrol in favor of positioning himself to intervene quickly when the moment arrived. His years of experience told him that the next few minutes would determine whether this remained a story of successful threat prevention or became something much darker. The hooded stranger approached the family with calculated confidence, his hand remaining positioned over the concealed object in his jacket pocket. He stopped directly in front of the parents, close enough that they had to look up from their phones to acknowledge his presence. The little girl continued playing on the nearby equipment. Unaware that she had become the focus of a dangerous situation, Marcus moved closer, using a maintenance cart as cover while keeping the unfolding scene within clear sight. His training had taught him that intervention timing was critical. Act too early, and potential crimes might not be prevented. Act too late, and innocent people could be harmed. Every instinct told him that this moment balanced on a knife's edge. The man spoke quietly to the parents, his voice too low for Marcus to hear the specific words, but loud enough to convey urgency and threat. The father's body language immediately shifted from relaxed to alert. While the mother's hand instinctively reached toward her daughter's direction, whatever the stranger was saying had clearly alarmed them both. Then the situation escalated with terrifying speed. The hooded man withdrew his hand from his pocket, revealing a folding knife with a 4-inch blade that caught the fluorescent lighting as he held it low against his body. The weapon wasn't large or dramatic, but its presence transformed casual conversation into immediate mortal danger. The mother gasped audibly, her free hand moving to cover her mouth while her eyes filled with terror. The father started to stand from the bench, but stopped when the man with the knife gestured for him to remain seated. Other families in the area continued their normal activities. Unaware that violence had invaded their safe space, the stranger's voice became slightly louder. Still controlled, but with an edge that carried across the intervening distance to Marcus. The words that reached the security guard's ears made his blood freeze. "Your little girl looks very pretty today. I think she should come with me for a while." The phrase contained layers of threat that made Marcus's professional experience scream warnings. This wasn't a robbery or random crime of opportunity. The man had specifically targeted this family and their child, suggesting planning and premeditation that made him exponentially more dangerous than typical mall troublemakers. The little girl, still playing on the climbing equipment, began to sense tension from her parents. She looked toward the bench where her mother and father sat rigid with fear, their faces pale and their postures frozen. The child's innocent confusion was heartbreaking. She knew something was wrong but couldn't understand what had changed in her safe, happy world. Marcus made his decision. Years of training and experience converged into a moment of absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. He couldn't wait for backup, couldn't rely on negotiation or de-escalation techniques, and couldn't risk allowing the situation to develop further. The threat to the child was immediate and genuine. Requiring direct action despite the personal risk involved, the security guard began moving toward the family. No longer concerned with maintaining cover or appearing casual, his radio remained silent on his belt. There wasn't time to call for emergency support or coordinate with other personnel. Whatever happened next would depend entirely on his ability to neutralize a knife-wielding threat without allowing harm to come to innocent people. The hooded stranger noticed Marcus's approach and turned slightly, keeping both the family and the security guard within his line of sight. His grip on the knife tightened, and his stance shifted to accommodate the new variable in his planned scenario. The man's eyes held a coldness that Marcus had seen before, and truly dangerous individuals, people who had moved beyond normal human inhibitions, and were capable of inflicting serious harm without remorse. The little girl finally understood that something was seriously wrong. She climbed down from the play equipment and began walking toward her parents, her young mind unable to process the complexity of the threat, but recognizing her family's fear. Every step she took brought her closer to immediate danger. Marcus realized he was out of time. The convergence of the child, her terrified parents, and an armed predator created a situation that demanded immediate resolution. His next actions would determine whether this story ended with successful protection of innocent life or became the kind of tragedy that haunted communities for years afterward. The moment of confrontation arrived with crystalline clarity. Marcus stepped into speaking range of the armed stranger, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. He had learned long ago that projecting calm authority could sometimes diffuse volatile situations before they escalated to violence. "Sir, I need you to step away from this family and put your hands where I can see them," Marcus said, his tone firm but not aggressive. His positioning deliberately placed him between the knife-wielding man and the little girl, who had stopped walking when she sensed the adult's tension. The hooded stranger turned to face Marcus fully, sizing up this new obstacle to his plans. The knife remained visible in his grip, held low but ready for use. His eyes showed no fear, only calculation as he assessed whether the security guard represented a manageable problem or a serious threat to his intentions. "This doesn't concern you," the man replied, his voice carrying the flat affect that Marcus recognized from his training as particularly dangerous. People who spoke without emotional inflection while holding weapons were often the most unpredictable and violence-prone. Walk away and nobody gets hurt. The parents remained frozen on their bench, caught between terror for their daughter and uncertainty about whether intervention would make the situation worse. The father's hands were clenched into fists, his body coiled with the desperate energy of a parent wanting to protect his child but unsure how to act without triggering violence. Marcus took another careful step forward, maintaining eye contact with the armed man while using his peripheral vision to track the family's positions. Professional training had taught him to manage multiple variables simultaneously during crisis situations. But the presence of an innocent child added emotional weight that made every decision feel monumentally important. Actually, this concerns me very much, Marcus responded, his voice remaining level. Threatening families is exactly what concerns me. The little girl needs to stay with her parents. And you need to put that knife away and leave peacefully. The stranger's expression shifted slightly, showing the first crack in his controlled demeanor. He had clearly expected easy compliance from frightened parents, not professional resistance from trained security personnel. The knife moved in his grip, not yet raised threateningly, but no longer held casually at his side. Other shoppers began to notice the unusual tension in the play area. A few adults looked up from their own activities, sensing something wrong but not yet understanding the nature of the threat. Marcus hoped they would have the wisdom to move their own children away from the developing situation, rather than trying to intervene without proper training. The little girl stood motionless between the playground equipment and her parents, her young mind struggling to process the adult conflict surrounding her. Her innocence made her simultaneously the most important person to protect and the most vulnerable target if the situation erupted into violence. Marcus could see his backup security officers approaching from the distant corridor, but they were still too far away to provide immediate assistance. Radio communication might escalate the threat if the armed man interpreted it as calling for police response. Every decision carried potentially devastating consequences. The hooded stranger seemed to reach his own decision point. His body language shifted from defensive to aggressive. He took a step toward the little girl, while keeping the knife visible as a deterrent to interference. The movement was subtle but unmistakable in its intent. He was attempting to claim his target before opposition could prevent him. Marcus realized that verbal de-escalation had reached its limits. The man with the knife was committed to his course of action and wouldn't be dissuaded by conversation or negotiation. The security guard had trained for this moment throughout his career, but facing real violence in defense of an innocent child felt entirely different from classroom scenarios and practice exercises. The distance between all the players in this drama measured only a few feet, but the space felt charged with potential energy that could explode in any direction. Marcus prepared himself mentally and physically for whatever came next, knowing that his response in the following seconds would determine whether this story ended with successful protection or unspeakable tragedy. The armed stranger made his move with startling suddenness. He lunged toward the little girl, while simultaneously raising the knife toward Marcus, attempting to use the weapon as both threat and distraction. His plan seemed to involve grabbing the child before anyone could react effectively, then using her as leverage to escape or control the situation. Marcus had anticipated exactly this type of escalation. Years of training and natural protective instincts converged into a response that was both swift and precise. Instead of backing away from the knife threat, he stepped forward and to the side, using his body to shield the girl while simultaneously grabbing for the stranger's wrist. The collision between the two men was violent but brief. Marcus's larger frame and professional training gave him significant advantages in close-quarters combat, but the knife created a dangerous variable that could turn the encounter deadly in an instant. His primary goal wasn't to win a fight, but to neutralize the threat to the innocent child. The impact sent both men stumbling, with Marcus maintaining his grip on the stranger's knife hand while using his other arm to push the little girl toward her parents. "Get her away from here," he shouted to the father, who finally broke from his frozen state and rushed to scoop up his daughter. The hooded man fought desperately to break free from Marcus's hold, twisting and striking with his free hand while trying to bring the knife into play. His movements had the frantic energy of someone whose carefully planned attack had been disrupted. Leaving him improvising with increasing desperation, Marcus focused on controlling the weapon while positioning his body to absorb any blows, rather than allowing them to reach the retreating family. The knife remained locked in a contest of strength and leverage, its blade pointing skyward as both men struggled for dominance. Training had taught him that disarming techniques were less important than simply preventing the weapon from being used against innocent people. The mother grabbed her daughter and began moving toward the mall's main corridor, away from the violence, but not yet far enough to guarantee safety. The father hesitated, torn between protecting his family and helping the security guard who was risking his life for their sake. Marcus caught his eye and nodded toward his wife and child. The message was clear that their safety was the priority. Other shoppers finally understood that serious violence was occurring in their midst. Parents quickly gathered their own children and began moving away from the play area. While several adults positioned themselves to call for emergency assistance, the normal sounds of retail commerce were replaced by urgent voices and the scuffling of the physical confrontation. The armed stranger realized his plan was failing and began fighting with the desperation of someone facing capture and legal consequences. He managed to partially break free from Marcus's grip, creating enough space to swing the knife in a wild arc that barely missed the security guard's torso. The weapon's blade caught the fluorescent lighting as it passed, a reminder of how quickly the situation could turn fatal. Marcus responded by driving his shoulder into the man's chest, using his weight and momentum to slam him against the decorative planter where he had originally been standing. The impact jarred the knife loose from the stranger's grip, sending it clattering across the tile floor beyond immediate reach of either combatant. With the weapon neutralized, the dynamics of the confrontation shifted dramatically. The hooded man was no longer armed and dangerous, but rather a criminal caught in the act of attempted kidnapping. His physical resistance continued, but without the lethal threat that had made the situation so critical moments earlier. Marcus used his training and restraint techniques to pin the stranger against the planter while his backup officers finally arrived to assist. The immediate danger had passed, but the adrenaline and emotional impact of defending an innocent child from armed predation would take much longer to fade. The little girl was safe in her parents' arms at the far end of the corridor, crying from confusion and fear but physically unharmed. The family's peaceful shopping trip had been shattered by violence. But the outcome could have been infinitely worse without professional intervention at the crucial moment. The aftermath of violence brought its own complex challenges. Marcus maintained his hold on the subdued attacker while his fellow security officers secured the scene and retrieved the dropped knife as evidence. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as emergency responders raced toward the mall to handle what had been reported as an armed assault and attempted kidnapping. The hooded stranger had stopped struggling once the weapon was beyond his reach, but his eyes still held the same cold calculation that had first alerted Marcus to the danger. Even in defeat, showed no remorse for threatening an innocent child or remorse for the terror he had inflicted on a peaceful family. His silence was more unsettling than angry words would have been. Mall management arrived quickly to assess the situation and coordinate with law enforcement. The play area was cordoned off as a crime scene, and other shoppers were guided to alternative routes through the complex. What had been a place of children's laughter and family joy was now marked by police tape and evidence markers where the knife had fallen. The little girl's family remained at a safe distance, but the father approached Marcus once the immediate danger had clearly passed. His handshake was firm, and his eyes were bright with tears of gratitude and relief. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying weight that formal speeches could never match. "You saved my daughter." Marcus nodded, accepting the thanks, but feeling the familiar mixture of satisfaction and emotional exhaustion that followed crisis situations. Protecting innocent people was why he had chosen security work. But each successful intervention carried its own psychological cost. The knowledge of what could have happened would stay with him for years to come. Police officers took custody of the attacker and began the formal process of charging him with assault. making terroristic threats and attempted kidnapping. The evidence was overwhelming: multiple witnesses, security camera footage, and the physical weapon itself. Legal consequences would follow, but they could never completely undo the trauma inflicted on the victims. Detectives interviewed Marcus extensively about his observations and actions. His professional training had prepared him to be a reliable witness, providing clear testimony about the suspect's behavior, the specific threats made, and the escalation that led to physical intervention. The case would likely result in serious prison time for the perpetrator. The mall's security footage confirmed every detail of Marcus's account. The cameras had captured the stranger's prolonged surveillance of children, his approach to the family, the display of the weapon, and the physical confrontation that ended the threat. Technology provided objective verification of what human courage had accomplished. Media attention followed inevitably. Local news stations wanted to interview the hero security guard who had saved a child from a knife-wielding predator. Marcus declined most requests, preferring to let his actions speak rather than seeking recognition or publicity. He understood that real heroism was about protecting others, not promoting oneself. The little girl's mother sent a handwritten letter to Marcus through the mall's administrative office. In careful cursive writing, she thanked him for giving her daughter the chance to grow up safely and for showing her family that there were good people.
Ow.
Well, why so why turn to rhyme while wit I'm all gonna you're all whatever your eye working wire and power is out on enter and room one I'm so I'm ring cracker castle ka ring I can arrive a bike and by to her I decide where I why going to one with the will we side go over where we're so which so far and so far away I was the letter became one of Marcus's most treasured possessions. Colleagues and supervisors praised Marcus's quick thinking and professional response to a dangerous situation. His actions had prevented a potential tragedy, while minimizing risk, too. Bystanders and maintaining the mall's reputation as a safe place for families. Marcus knew that success in this instance didn't guarantee similar outcomes in future situations. Predators would continue to threaten innocent people, weapons would still find their way into public spaces, and security personnel would face split-second decisions with life-or-death consequences. Vigilance could never be relaxed. The psychological impact of the confrontation would fade gradually, replaced by professional pride in having done his job correctly when it mattered most. Marcus had proven to himself and others that years of training and experience could translate into effective action when innocent lives hung in the balance. Months later, the mall had returned to its normal rhythm of commerce and family activity. The play area bustled with children and parents, the incident having faded from most people's memories as new concerns and daily routines took precedence. For Marcus, however, the experience had left permanent changes in how he viewed his role and responsibilities. The legal proceedings had concluded, the attacker receiving a lengthy prison sentence. During the trial, additional evidence emerged, suggesting he had been planning similar attacks for months, possibly targeting multiple locations where families gathered. Marcus's intervention had likely prevented not just one tragedy, but potentially several others that might have followed. The little girl's family occasionally visited the mall, and Marcus would see them from a distance during his patrols. The child appeared to have recovered completely from the trauma, playing happily with the resilience that allowed young minds to heal from frightening experiences. Her parents always acknowledged Marcus with grateful nods when their paths crossed. Marcus found himself paying closer attention to subtle behavioral cues during his regular duties. The experience had sharpened his already well-developed instincts for recognizing potential threats. Before they materialized into actual danger, he had always been observant, but surviving a life or death, Confrontation had refined his ability to distinguish between genuine concern and paranoid overreaction. Training sessions for mall security personnel now included analysis of the incident as an example of proper threat assessment and response. Marcus reluctantly participated in these discussions, understanding that sharing his experience could help other officers protect innocent people more effectively. His expertise had become a resource for improving overall security protocols. The psychological counseling provided by his employer had helped him process the emotional aftermath of violence and the weight of responsibility that came with protecting others. Professional support taught him that feeling occasional anxiety about similar future situations was normal and healthy rather than a sign of weakness or inadequacy. Letters from the community continued to arrive occasionally, thanking him for his service and expressing appreciation for people willing to risk themselves for strangers. Parents wrote about feeling safer, knowing that dedicated professionals watched over public spaces where their children played and learned about the world. Marcus's family expressed pride in his actions but also concern about the dangers he faced at work. His wife had always known that security work carried risks, but seeing news reports about the knife attack made those possibilities feel much more real and immediate. Their conversations about his career took on new depth and honesty. The mall installed additional security cameras and improved lighting in areas where visual surveillance had been challenging. Management credited Marcus's detailed incident report with identifying weaknesses in their security infrastructure that needed addressing. His experience directly contributed to enhanced safety for all future visitors. Marcus received commendations from local law enforcement agencies and civic organizations recognizing his courage and professionalism during the crisis. While he appreciated the recognition, he remained most proud of the simple fact that an innocent child had gone home safely to her family because he had been prepared to do his job correctly. Years of routine patrols and minor incidents had prepared him for one crucial moment when genuine evil threatened genuine innocence. The vast majority of his working days involved helping lost shoppers find their cars or mediating minor disputes between store employees and customers. But on one Saturday morning, everything he had learned and trained for had focused into a few minutes that made the difference between safety and tragedy. Looking back, Marcus understood that heroism wasn't about seeking dramatic confrontations or glory. Instead, it was about being prepared to act correctly when circumstances demanded it. Regardless of personal risk or recognition, the little girl in the pink dress deserved to grow up without being harmed by predators. And he had been privileged to play a role in protecting that future. The shopping mall continued its daily mission of providing goods and services to the community. But it also served as a reminder that ordinary places sometimes required extraordinary people to remain safe. Marcus returned to his patrols each day, vigilant and ready, understanding that evil could appear without warning, but confident that good people could still make a difference when it mattered most.